chapter 9. It's called The Ultimate Failure of Leah Remini. All right, so I'm going to read the first paragraph so I can reorient you, right? So I can orient you to this chapter and what we're going to go over. So after finding out that Scientology really hasn't done any illegal activities, Remini needed to invent some. And who better than to work with on this than the man who lied to the leader of Scientology since he was a Scientology spokesperson? Well, that is exactly what occurred. Leah and her posse actually went through the past records of all of the lawsuits that people who are either anti-Scientology or were convinced that Scientology was the fault for their situation. This caused them to find people filing wrongful death suits on the religion. Okay, I won't go over this too much, but what I'll do is I'm actually going to read you some of the quotes, some of the statements in an affidavit. Okay, this is the one where people keep talking about. I will not mention what case, but I will just mention that it's in Clearwater, Florida. Okay, people continue to mention this case and not letting this individual rest in peace. Okay, so let's just go over it. Let's just go over some of the juicy affidavit statements made under penalty of perjury in the United States. He's actually, this person, his name's Robert Minton, he's exposing the anti-Scientology cult. So there he is. He's considered a whistleblower. And after making these statements, he was blackmailed, harassed, attacked, whatever, by the anti-Scientology cult. On March 9th, 1997, I met attorney Ken Dandor for the first time when I participated in a picket. Now, he passed on, right? But at this time, he, confessed to, being against the church, right, and doing some things. So you're going to see a little mentions of pickets or protests or whatever the heck kind of ruckus they were trying to throw at the church at that time to bury their crimes. So when I participated in a picket in Clearwater, Florida, against the church, Mr. Dandor had an extensive discussion, and at that meeting in my presence to learn about the pursuit of other Scientology corporations and church leaders as a litigation tactic to go after quote-unquote Scientology. Robert Minton, that's just one of the things, right? Here it is down here. Here's another statement that he made. It was my observation and intent that the LMT, Lisa McPherson Trust, was not only the vehicle designated to receive the proceeds of the wrongful death case, it was also used to avoid discovery in the case and disguise the fact that witnesses were being paid. He would know because he was paying them. The LMT, represented by Mr. Dandor, maintained that it was separate from the wrongful death case in order to avoid discovery and prevent witnesses from being deposed. Mr. Dandor filed many motions on behalf of LMT and me to try to prevent discovery requests from going forward. The truth was that that LMT was inextricably linked to this litigation. Perfect. So now, therefore, here's what they end up doing to the poor families of these innocent people who had a medical condition and for whatever reason were not attending to it. They blasted their family members and church officials that were not around at the time of these horrific incidents and would never have let this happen. Okay? So this is what Robert Minton says down here. I contacted Mr. Dandor in October 1997 and offered to loan the estate $100,000 to defray costs and expenses to this case, so this case could become a vehicle to attack Scientology on a broad scale. So as you can see, it's not wrongful death case. It just turned into a thing to attack the church. Anti-Scientology cult is never, they're not interested in getting justice or whatever the heck their buzzwords or PR slogans are. They're there to make money. They want to extort money from the church, right? They want to extort it. It says this, that $100,000 in all subsequent amounts up to a total of $2,050,000 I loaned to the estate was specifically for covering the expenses of litigating the wrongful death case. Robert Minton, still under penalty of perjury in the United States. Mr. Dandar also told me he did not want the money to appear to come from me because my financial involvement was making the case too messy, and that he wanted to conceal the money from his employees, Dr. Garko and Tom Haverty, so basically to justify cutting back payments to them. He told me I should never disclose these funds were from me. From this point forward, Mr. Dandar told me that he would tell his employees he was funding the litigation from his retirement account. So he was even lying to his employees. These people are slime balls. Following these conversations with Mr. Dandar about the $500,000, I caused a check dated May 1st, 2000 in that amount to be issued to Mr. Dandar by the Union Bank of Switzerland, payable at Chase Manhattan Bank in New York. I handed this check to Mr. Dandar at the Bombay Bicycle Club in Clearwater, Florida, a few days after May 1st, 2000. So they're sneaky. So they're sneaky about it. They're basically hiding this from the court in the church. Because if the church found out about this, they just tell the judge. So they couldn't have it be discovered by the church or the court. So they're very sneaky. But then what started happening was after he stopped funding the case, a lot of the critics who were working with Mr. Dandar just totally turned on Mr. Minton and me and really put us in a situation where it was a worse attack against us than even what was happening from Scientology or what they had ever done. And the anti-Scientologists have been angrier at us and more threatening at us and more intimidating of us than Scientology ever even thought of being. I'm not kidding. So he put so much money into this wrongful death case to try to get some money back from it, right? So he had basically invested in a fallacy, right? A false case, right? So he knew that it was going to be discovered. So he totally screwed up his affidavit. He totally confessed to the judge after being found out. He confessed to the judge after coming through with a deal with the church because the church had found out. He had actually walked up to the church and made a deal with them and said, "What would you want us to do? What would you like us to do?" Robert Minton was like, "What would you like me and my wife to do?" Basically, based on what we did. Would you like money? Like what? And they said, just write an affidavit and confess to the judge. That's it. That's all they wanted. They wanted justice because this was not their doing. This was not their fault. This was just a case to attack the church, not to get justice. Nothing about that. They just used it as a pawn to attack the church. Several weeks before my deposition, on May 24th, 2000, I had several conversations with Mr. Dandar regarding additional funds he said he needed for the trial of the wrongful death case. He asked me for enough money to take him through the trial. He told me an additional $500,000 would be sufficient. He told me he had a way to hide the funds from Scientology and told me I should arrange my payments in such a way that the funds could not be traced back to me. He told me he would not put these funds in his client trust account and that he had another account that Scientology could never find. Robert Minton, again, made under penalty of perjury in the United States. By the way, this Dandar guy, he's the anti-Scientology cult's attorney. That he's the tool that they use to try to attack the church for money, to extort funds, right, with false litigation. This is just one of the many he's tried. I gathered the most vocal Scientology critics and most of the anti-Scientology witnesses under the umbrella of the LMT I paid the witnesses through my funding of the LMT and put other critics on the LMT board of advisors because I was funding both the case and its witnesses. The wrongful death case and the LMT became virtually interchangeable. This whole show, you know, bringing my sister into this, dragging all this through the mud is really, it's appalling. I mean, I can't believe somebody would do that. So you have to understand, they're going after people that, so on top of Robert Minton going through that whole entire thing, right, he's exposed all of it, and he exposed all of it. The ASC, which is the anti-Scientology cult, really has projected all of their crimes, tried to blame the church for all of their crimes, and it's just not working for them. I mean, if you can see right here, this is just one affidavit out of the many I've seen of people coming out against them. I could even name another one, which I'm pretty sure it's actually in here, and if it's not, it's in the hidden agenda. But the second quote that I just read you, that's a person, that's from a brother, right, of a person that actually had passed on, and the anti-Scientology cult basically goes after every single Scientologist and every single person of a new religion that passed on, and labels it as suspicious, right? And then makes money and tries to make money off of it, tries to extort funds, you know, from the church. I mean, they just are evil. Okay, they're just evil people, and they're doing this because they try to make big bucks off of litigation. And you know, and you'll find eventually how that all works out, and how they get away with it, and how we can stop it. Alrighty, guys, thanks so much for joining on in, and thanks so much for, you know, at least looking at the overview of chapter 9. We'll go over chapter 10 in the next video. If you do not have your copy of Escaping Leah, get it at exposingcrimes.com. Again, that's exposingcrimes.com. Thanks so much, guys.